I came with this one, Micah 7:18, to start it off. Who is a God like unto thee, that pardoneth iniquity, and passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? He retaineth not his anger forever, because he delighteth in mercy. And I said, man, that's beautiful. It says so much in that verse that we can have encouragement just from that. And so the title of today's sermon, forget it. Forget it, you know? And I took this from a few Bible verses, and sometimes I'll go fast with the Bible verses. So you want to just write it down and read it later, that's fine, especially because of time. The first Bible verse I'm going to go to is going to be Genesis 8, verse 1. Genesis 8, verses 1. And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth. And I stopped there, and I went back, and I said, hold on. God remembered. You have to think about that. So wait, the creator of all things has forgotten something. Is that even possible? God, who has begun to tell us of our beginning and what we call life and how it began, and this is all in Genesis, and God has already forgotten by the time we get to Genesis 8. I said, how can God forget anything? What I had forgotten is that a decision had been made. Laws were broken and judgment had been handed down. And God had created something new. In Colossians 1:16 through 20, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have preeminence. For it pleaseth the Father that in him should all fullness dwell, and having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself, by him I say, whether they be things in earth or in heaven. That's followed up by John 1:3. It says, all things were made by him again to confirm the scriptures. And without him was not anything made that was made. So, what was new? What had he created? It was man. Because in Genesis 1:26, like I said, I'm gonna throw them out there, but it's for the storyline. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing upon the earth. Man was created and given a choice, the same as the angels. For in Psalms 8:5, for thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. Thou madest him a little lower than the angels, the confirmation from Hebrews 2:7, that thou crownest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hand. And again, in Hebrews 1:4, being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance ordained a more excellent name than they. So what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the Son of Man that thou visitest him? You have to think about this, because what do we forget and what do we remember? The Bible is here for us to remember, to consistently remind us of things that God has said or done. And so therefore, we're trying to search the mind of God because these things come from him. But can we do that? For in Isaiah 55:9, it says, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So back to forgetting and remembering. The mind can forget, but also can remember. For as I started off, it said, and God remembered Noah. Thus it came about when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Then God remembered Rachel and gave heed to her, opened her womb. But that wasn't the only woman that God had remembered, because in Samuel 1:19, it tells the story of his mother. And then they arose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord and returned again to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah had relations with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So what does God remember? How does he forget? I mean, is it even possible? We go right back to it. How does God forget? Passion, love, and real forgiveness begins honestly and truthfully by forgetting. Have you noticed that? You can't have passion or love or true forgiveness without forgetting. Well, let's look it up. In the Hebrew, it's called zechor. That's the Hebrew word for remember. It can also mean to recall, to keep in mind, or to bear in mind. It's sometimes used in a construct with the word I'm, which means if or with. In the Old Testament, to zechor is not just a mental activity, but a way of acting in accordance with what is remembered. So real forgiveness begins honestly and truthfully by forgetting. Moving past an incident, total and complete forgiveness. Hebrews 10:17, and their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. Isaiah follows up by, behold, for peace I had great bitterness, but thou hast in love to my soul delivered it from the pit of corruption, for thou hast cast all my sins behind thy back. How do you forget, or how do you get God to remember? Do you want him to remember? We've done a lot of things. Do we want him to forget? When you're thinking about God, what is it? Do you want him to forget? Or do you want him to remember? What do you think? Forget or remember? How so? So remember us, right? Forget our sins. Remembering and forgetting. But do we apply those things with ourselves? What do we like to remember? And what do we like to forget? Do we forget? Let's use God as an example. Do we remember the good things that he's done for us? How he's consistently done something, always doing that, and those that came before? Or forget? I don't know. It's a tough one because of God and who he is, because who is God that he is mindful of man, but yet and still our minds can't capture the things of God. In Ezekiel 21:24, it says, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because ye have made your iniquity be remembered, and that your transgressions are discovered, so that in all your doings your sins do appear, because I say that ye are come to remembrance, ye shall be taken with the hand. Now, as Sister Natalie said, it depends on what you want him to remember. And here it says the transgressions are discovered, so that in all your doings, not in some of your doings, in everything you do, your sin does appear. Because I say that ye are come to remembrance, ye shall be taken with the hand. So God remembers what? Everything. And I think as people, we would like him to forget some of those things. But he doesn't. He remembers them because it is iniquity, it is sin that separates us from him. So you have to know the cause. But in Micah 7:19, he says, he will turn again. He will have compassion upon us. He will subdue our iniquities, and thou will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. Or as some people say, into a sea of forgetfulness. Huh? How far is that? How far is the east from the west? You know, he says that's how far your sins and transgressions have been removed. In Psalms 103:12, if you're looking for it. And in Hebrews 18:12, why so many verses? I think because of study. Study to show yourself approved. You're either going to forget or you're going to remember the things that you study. And how do you remember when you forget? Practice, right? Consistently looking in it. You remember last time I said I had a friend, maybe a couple of them, who just have a Bible sitting at the house. So what can they remember? What have they forgotten? Everything, you know? Yeah. So they forgot where to even find it, anything. They've forgotten everything, you know? So that's why I believe the Lord is pressing upon us to consistently look to the reminders of him and the things that he said within this Bible. And so you'll hear me always say a lot of Bible verses, because when it comes to me in life and the things that I go through, it's the only thing that works. I don't know about you, it's the only thing that works for me, to the point to where if I am not studying, if I'm not engaged in doing things about God and bringing him to remembrance, then I'm definitely going to fall off, you know? So in Hebrews 8:12, it says, for I will be merciful to the righteous, to the unrighteous, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. So he remembers sin, he remembers iniquity, but at the same time, he doesn't want to remember it. As far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. What do we remember and what do we forget? I remember there was a time, and I was listening to, I can't remember who it was. I think it was some type of knowledge thing or some type of mental health thing on remembering. And they said, if you study the Bible and in the morning, per se, in the morning, you have worship and you pick out a Bible verse, just start with a verse. You don't even have to start with a chapter. And you pick it out and you read it. In the morning, you wake up. Okay, hey, Psalms 1, right? I said that for you. Psalms 1. And you go through your day. You're being attacked all day. Things are popping up all day. You're tired. Your funds are low. Yeah? Your patience is down. The enemy is attacking not only you, but your kids, your way of life, and everything else. By the end of the day, can you remember what you read in the morning? Even if it was just one verse. What did you read this morning? How many of you read this morning? What do you remember? And it takes me back to where I said, Paul said, the things that I want to do, I don't. And the things I don't want to do, I do. And I said, how do you get to that point? How? Is it that you're doing something wrong? Or is it that we need to understand that we fight not against flesh and blood, but against spirits and principalities? Every time God remembers something, he's quick to remind us. And I believe that in this day and age, we're going to need a lot of reminders. We're going to have to remember who we are. We're going to have to remember who God is and what he's done for us. And we're going to have to forget those things that keep us from becoming who we are. They say that you shouldn't go to bed angry. Don't let the sun rest on your anger. Or don't bring offerings and tithes without forgiving your brother, you know? And have you woken up before I woke up this week? And I remember, let's see, it had to be like Wednesday. Didn't have a lot of time. Scheduled appointments, everything. And the appointments cancel at the last minute. So it just makes it so much harder on your day and the things that you have to do and you have prepared, that sometimes it can unhinge you. It takes you away from the mind of God, as Isaiah was saying. And we have to realize that in all things that we do, the things that need to be forgotten can really help us to move forward. I woke up the next day and was still remembering and upset with the people that had messed up the schedule. And I said, just think about how many things you do without knowing it of different people throughout that whole day, to where you wake up and you just start off angry. You don't want to read. How do you start your day off? You usually start it off with worship, but this day you're not starting off with worship. You're just going to get started. And of course, like normal, how does that day go? It goes really bad, right? And why? Because we're not able to forget. We're not able to let go of those things that hinder us and keep us from achieving what we should be remembering through God. If we can remember the things of God, the things that he has said about us, how man was the precious, the most beautiful thing that he had made, and why? He had made it in his own image, But what happened with man? He says we always forget. We forget what he's brought us through. We forget his laws. We forget how to treat people, how to respond, how this world is not our own. It's not our home. And so you're going to encounter a lot of things, and we forget all these things, and it leads us and causes us, well, we're going to sin every day anyway, for all of sin and come short of the glory of God. But we definitely try not to, right? Isn't that the definition of a Christian? And that's why no one really wants to stand up and say, hey, I'm a Christian. Why? The word, people have messed the word up, So now you say you're a Christian, they're like, oh, so you believe this, you believe that, you do this, you don't do that, Why? Because that's all they remember. That's all they know, But what have they forgotten? All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So when you say that, I believe people think that you're going to be so much better than them. You're never going to get upset. Your life is great. Your funds are good. You don't get sick. Nothing. And that's how you know that you're following God. But is that true? No. Because David said something totally different. David said, no, I've seen the righteous suffer. And that's all they do. And I've seen the vain and those of the world do what they want and have extra and have more. And I was almost jealous of them. So those that are following God know, as Paul said, the things I want to do, I don't do, and the things I don't want to do, I do. So he also says, moving on, pressing forward to the things that he does know, and he was in jail. He said, no, I'm in jail, but my thoughts are on heavenly places. So he had a peace that surpasses all understanding. And so when we remember what's important, that God created us for his purpose, he created everything for his purpose. How is he going to allow us to continue to go through the things that we've gone through? He remembered Lot. Where did Lot live? Sodom and Gomorrah. But he remembered Lot. He remembered Abraham. Sarah wasn't going to have kids. There's a lot of people in the Bible that weren't going to have kids, and God came and remembered them. He remembered Noah during the calamity. I mean, you have to think about that one. That one really stuck out to me because I said, well, shoot, you put him in the boat. Why would you even want to forget him? Well, the reason that he put him in the boat, the sin abound, and that the world was steadily moving in a way that he had to separate himself from. And so when he says he remembered Noah, I just picture Noah and them in that boat, and the world is just filled with water, and it's just this little speck, this little boat that's probably huge. But compared to everything in the world being covered with water, that little boat being remembered, and while history, the boat didn't seem to go too far. As you look at it in the mountains of Ararat, that's all it had to do was float. So they didn't need to have a steering wheel, nothing. They just had these big stones attached to it for anchors. So it just stayed like this. Now, that's a beautiful thing, right? Settles right down in the mountains of Ararat. Now, in our life, we go back to it. What does it look like? Flood. You're the only one out there, right? Trying to observe God. You're the only one trying to do good. You're the only one holding on in this world that's flooded with evil. And God remembers you. What has he done for you lately that you can remember that's worth speaking of? Or what has he done for you lately that you would dare forget? So when we think about our day, our life, and the things that God is doing, I came with it and I said, sometimes you just got to forget it. Just forget it all. Wipe it clean. Just clean the slate. Forget it and start again. And as we continue to start again, he begins to renew in us his promises. And their sins and iniquities I will remember no more, and he will turn again. He will have compassion upon us. He will subdue our iniquities, and thou will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea, a sea of forgetfulness. And we'll be able to be free, because as it said, Zechor is a way of acting in accordance with what is remembered. So as we continue to remember what God has done for us and forget those things that we've done for ourselves, because it's usually self, I think that our prayers and our lives will be strengthened more. I remember the verse that says, what can you change about anything? He says, the birds I care for. You can't change one gray hair. You can't change. I know the number of the hairs on your head. I've put these lilies in the field, and you look at them, and all their splendor is better than Solomon, and all his riches and glories. So who is man that God is mindful of them? Why does he keep bringing us into remembrance? I think when we put a value on ourselves and on our lives, regardless of what's going on, then we're remembering what we should be remembering. And he'll help us to forget the rest. Do you remember when it says in the Bible that we will go to heaven and we will sit there? And it says you'll be able to ask Jesus any and everything you want to ask him, right? Why was this? Who was this? And when was this? And what was that? But then I'd read another verse where it says you won't even remember the things of the world. Now, isn't that beautiful? We will be known as we were yet known, right? Different bodies. But let's work on that. Let's work on forgetting it, forgetting the things that hurt us, the people that speak to us, the incidents from years ago. I hear people consistently say things that have happened to them within the church, and that's why they don't believe. You know, hey, when I was a kid, yeah, they told me this. You have to forgive and forget, you know, or, you know, I remember the pastors were doing this, the deacons were doing this, the people were doing this, and it's not helping them at all in any way, shape, or fashion. And so some things you need to forget, but do they remember any Bible verses or anything? And they usually don't. So it's what we focus on. And as we continue to focus on not only remembering, but in putting things into action. As I was saying before, Hebrew words are actions. So the word zachor, to keep in mind, to bear in mind, also means to recall. Let's recall what God has done for us and what he has planned to do with us. They said the angels, as the disciples were looking, and Jesus was just rising up, the angel stood next to him and said, "Why gaze ye, looking up? Same way he came, he's going to come back." They were giving him something to remember, you know, because they were looking up. Why do you think they were still looking up? They didn't want to forget, right? There he goes. Man, what a great life. We should have did this. Maybe we could have did this. And as they're sitting there thinking, the angel's standing right next to him, reminding him, he's coming back. And I think that's the biggest reminder that we need to have as we forget everything else, that God is coming back. And what are you going to be doing when he does? In Noah's days, they weren't ready. In Lot's days, they weren't ready. And he says it's going to be like that in these days. So I think we need to be ready for his second coming. We need to remember what he has said about it and about the world. He says, I've given him my word. I've given him your word. And the world has hated him. But don't take him out of the world. Just keep him from the evil one. And if you can remember that, then you know that regardless of your trials and your tribulations, God has got you. And we can forget it. And that's my prayer, is that we continually devote our lives to God in a way that is worthy unto him, by recollecting, reminding, recurring, flashing back, hearkening to, representing, all those words that are a synonym, as they would say, of remembering. For our closing hymn, we're going to go to hymn number 3.